Many people, with even a passing understanding of Chinese history and philosophy, will generally know that China has historically had three major philosophies: Confucianism, Taoism, and legalism. While the former two are often discussed in regards to Chinese ways of life, legalism is often associated with the beginnings of Chinese political history. In particular, the unification of Qing at the end of the Warring States period, as well as the subsequent legalist policies implemented by Qing that were both a contributor to its success as a feudal state and responsible for its collapse as a unified empire. It is for this reason that legalism may conjure up images of Confucian scholars being buried alive and an absolutist or rigid interpretation of the law that is often cruel at times. In reality, these two images are a pretty fair assessment of legalism, even in the words of classic legalist texts themselves. So, what is legalism? Today, that is the central question we will be discussing, as well as having a conversation about its central philosophical text, the Hanfeizi. This is Pacific Heart, and thank you so much for watching this video. At the beginning of our discussion, I find it important to first center our conversation on what legalism is. Now, legalism is a political philosophy that really originated as a reaction to the rise of feudalism in China following the gradual collapse of the Zhou dynasty during the Spring and Autumn period. Due to the rise of local feudal lords who were at first loyal to the Zhou king before later on seizing power and lands for themselves and ignoring central authority. Similarly, it was also a reaction to the growing entrenched corruption and bureaucratic rot that followed the rise of this feudal order during the Warring States period. Bureaucratic positions during this time were often given to corrupt ministers, who used their positions to benefit themselves rather than the state or people. And generally, this was a period of instability, where governments in China struggled to govern effectively due to this corruption. It is for this reason that legalism as a philosophy is largely built around a central idea that the strength of the state is of the utmost importance. And as such, the laws should be strong and uniform so that governance can be done most efficiently. While it is unclear if Hanfei was a real person, the historical record says that he was born in a cadet branch of the royal family of the state of Han. He wrote largely due to the imminent collapse of the Han state that he was observing. His thoughts were widely circulated, enough so that the king of Qing, Yingzhen, still not yet Qin Si Huang, read them and was impressed. Qing had already engaged in legalist reforms for generations, and it had long been the state philosophy by Yingzhen's time. Yingzhen himself asked for an audience with Hanfei, and Hanfei to this wrote an essay called Preserving Han in an attempt to save his homeland. Li Si, the then prime minister of Qing, however, was threatened by Hanfei's writings and ordered him to commit suicide shortly after meeting the Qing king. Hanfei himself is a deeply controversial character in Chinese history. He, along with all of the most prominent legalist scholars, were responsible for creating the political machinery that supported the unification of China under Qing, and as such created the foundations for the imperial system that would last for over 2,000 years. Yet, because of their cruel methods and historical treatment of the Confucian philosophical school, which gained prominence during the later Han dynasty, they have been vilified as immoral and callous individuals who really lost the philosophical race. This was the general historical consensus until the rise of communism in mainland China, when the chairman Mao Zedong officially denounced Confucianism and began to be compared to the first emperor of China, Qin Si Huang, a famous legalist monarch. Due to this, the legalist school was reinterpreted as one that prioritized unity, strength, and security, and has generally even today been rehabilitated to have a neutral to even positive connotation in the minds of most people. People move towards benefit and avoid danger. This is Hanfeizi at its core, and it is for this reason that the Hanfeizi must be understood as a behavioralist text. Hanfei himself wrote, 民主之所道之启程者，二秉而已。二秉者，行； 德也. The way a wise ruler controls his ministers consists of only two levers. The two levers are punishment and virtue. What is meant by punishment and virtue? It is said killing and punishing are called punishment, while celebrating and rewarding are called virtue. Ministers fear punishment and desire reward. So when a ruler personally wields punishment and virtue, the ministers will then fear his authority and seek his benefits. It is these words that really frame Hanfei's view of human nature, which is really a neutral to negative view of human nature. To Hanfei, human nature is one where humans naturally pursue benefit and avoid things that they fear. This behavioralist paradigm forms the entire framework of Hanfei's philosophical arguments, ranging from his views of the ways that laws should be constructed to the ways that society and the ruler should be perceived. Hanfei places large emphasis on punishment and reward for two reasons. The first is that this is obviously the primary method for a ruler or state to impose laws. Laws that do not somehow reward good behavior or punish bad behavior, in Hanfei's view, are pointless, because they do not serve to prioritize order or destroy chaos. Interestingly, since Hanfei understands that this behavioralist model goes both ways, he repeatedly reminds his readers that a ruler must be emotionally unintelligible to his ministers, or else they too will manipulate him into supporting their private agendas once they understand his wants and dislikes. Hanfei writes, "The ruler should not show his desires. If the ruler shows his desires, the ministers will naturally begin to embellish and manipulate the ruler. The ruler should not reveal his intentions. If the ruler reveals his intentions, the ministers will then seek to distinguish themselves by showing off their differences. Therefore, it is said, remove preferences and aversions, and the ministers will reveal their simplicity. Remove old habits and wisdom, and the ministers will prepare themselves naturally." Basically saying, the ruler that does not show himself to his subjects cannot be manipulated, and therefore is able to be more objective. A common misunderstanding with the view of Hanfei is that he views human nature as fundamentally evil. While this is somewhat true, from what I have just said, it is clear that this is a bit of a generalization. In one section of the Hanfeizi, Hanfei writes, "Among sovereigns ruling over 10,000 chariots and lords ruling over 1,000 chariots, there are cases where queens, consorts, or legitimate sons, designated as crown princes, desire the early death of their sovereign. A cartwright who makes carts wishes for people's wealth and rank, while a carpenter who makes coffins wishes for people to die young. This is not because the former is kind-hearted and the latter is wicked. It is simply that if people are not wealthy, carts will not sell. And if people do not die, coffins will not be bought. Their feelings are not hatred towards others. Their interests lie in others' deaths. Therefore, when the faction of a queen, consort, or crown prince is formed, and they desire the sovereign's death, it is because if the ruler does not die, their power will not grow. Their feelings are not rooted in hatred towards the sovereign, but rather their interests lie in his death. Thus, a sovereign cannot be careless about those who wish for his demise, for their own benefit. Therefore, when halos surround the sun and moon, from outside the danger lies within. One should be wary of those they dislike, but misfortune often comes from those they love." In all, really showing how Hanfei's view of human nature is often misconstrued. I often find it said online that Hanfei's view of human nature is that human nature is evil, and that it is for this reason that the people must be cowed into submission by a powerful and punitive legal system, kind of like the Leviathan. This is only partially true. Hanfei's primary gripe with human nature is that, in his view, it impedes on the ability of the state to provide for order, a role prescribed to governance by nearly every ancient Chinese philosophy. Hanfei, however, does not necessarily believe that people crave evil or deserve to be treated as if they are beyond the ability to be good. It is rather that everyone must be controlled and disciplined in order for the state to create a sense of safety and societal order. laws must be structured around human nature. The Hanfeizi ironically agrees with Confucian texts on the basis that governance should be in accordance with how people naturally behave. However, unlike Confucians who view human nature as generally good, as previously stated, Hanfei views human nature as purely dictated on desires and fears. As such, Hanfei says the most effective laws are ones that create punishments that people truly fear and provide rewards that people truly want. Hanfei is someone that has a strong faith in institutions. He argues that once laws are set up, the government basically runs itself. Once standards for the state are created, they must never be set aside. A state is really, in his view, only as strong as its laws, as well as its ability to enforce them. The Hanfeizi summarizes this by saying, good rulership that leads to the abandonment of laws leads to a declining or destroyed state. Importantly, Hanfei does not prescribe certain laws or say what a legal system should necessarily look like. Instead, he gives general guidance as for what to do and not to do when establishing a set of laws. Now, regarding this establishment of laws, Hanfei argues two things must be ensured. The first is that the law must be created in an efficient and artful way, otherwise known as su. And the other is that the law must be applied in a way that promotes order and strong government, fa. In this, he uses the two historical figures of Senbuhai, who represents su, and Sangyang, who represents fa, in order to show why both the art of the law and implementation of the law must both be carefully managed in order to create a strong legal system. Regarding Senbuhai, Hanfei writes that when the state of Han seceded from Jing, Senbuhai was one of the primary ministers of the new Han king. A legalist minister, he is considered a master at applying laws and delegating and keeping power out of the wrong hands. He is credited with creating the bureaucracy of the Han state, which later became deeply influential in imperial China, particularly with the civil service exams. Despite this, Senbuhai did not unify the legal code of the Han state, and in particular did not make a clearly defined penal code. In this chaotic system, the new laws of the Han state existed alongside the old ones of Jing. Due to this, when people broke the law, they would pit the two legal systems against each other to avoid punishment, since something that the Han law forbade may be accepted by the Jing law. This ultimately led to an entrenched corruption that severely hindered the Han state and ultimately led to its collapse. This is why, according to Hanfei, the art of law is not possible without a strong and unified legal system. On the other hand, Hanfei juxtaposes Senbuhai with Sangyang, a person who embodies the fa element of legalism who lacked the art of keeping the law out of the wrong hands. Sangyang was the legalist reformer responsible for the new legal system of Qing, a system that would set it up to become the most powerful of all of the Chinese warring states. Sangyang created the world's first police state. He unified households into groups of 5 and 10, like the military, and made these families share collective responsibility for crimes. All members of these clusters would be punished equally if one of them committed a crime, and the only way that they could avoid punishment was by reporting the crime before it happened. This effectively turned people against each other and made ordinary people enforcers of the law. Rewards for informants were generous, and punishments for crimes were harsh and inevitable. Sangyang also ensured that the laws were properly communicated to the people, so that they would know the laws and live in accordance with them. Hanfei writes that because of this, the people worked hard and did not fear death in battle. The state grew strong, but while the system worked, there was nothing that stopped people from seizing the power of the law for themselves, in particular, feudal lords. This is because the rulers themselves did not have the methods for keeping ministers, or power brokers, out of power, and ministers often seized the law for themselves, selfishly. Ironically, this is how Sangyang died, when the ministers of the Qing state turned against him and used the laws that he made in order to execute him. This was in part due to the types of laws that Sangyang made. For instance, he made a rule that the rights of a person would correspond to their military merits. If someone beheaded one person, they were entitled to going up one noble rank and receiving a low salaried position in the government. If one beheaded two people, they could even go higher. But beheading people doesn't really have anything to do with statecraft or skilled trades such as being a doctor or a craftsman, showing how Sangyang failed to create a system that delegated power correctly. Now, why is this legal system necessary? Ultimately, Hanfei argues that a strong legal system is so important because it promotes righteousness by protecting good people. Hanfei argues that righteousness is inherently self-compromising, and due to this, in a chaotic system that rewards people for acting in their self-interests, righteous people either become corrupted or never obtain power at all. As such, the system is corrupt and common people suffer. This idea is best summarized in Hanfei's own words. He writes, "Therefore, when a sage governs the state, he establishes clear laws and proclaims strict punishments, in order to rescue all living beings from disorder, remove calamities from the entire realm, ensure that the strong do not oppress the weak, the many do not abuse the few, the elderly can live out their years, orphans and young children can grow up safely, borders are not invaded, rulers and ministers remain close, fathers and sons protect one another, and there is no danger of death or capture. This is also the greatest possible achievement. Ignorant people do not understand this. They mistakenly regard it as harshness. The ignorant desire order, but despise the means by which it is achieved. They all hate danger, yet favor the causes that bring about peril. How do we know this? Severe punishments and heavy penalties are what the people dislike. Yet, they are the means by which a state is governed. To feel pity for the common people, enlightened punishments is what the populace favors. Yet, it is precisely this that leads to a state's peril. A sage who establishes laws for the state must necessarily go against worldly opinion, in line with morality and righteousness. Those who understand this are in agreement with justice, yet different from convention. Those who do not understand it differ from justice, but align with convention. Since few in the world understand this, righteousness is wrongly regarded as incorrect. Regarding this legal system, Hanfei makes it clear that the laws must originate their authority from the ruler. The ruler must never allow his ministers to seize authority by either enforcing the law themselves or overstepping the law. Hanfei outlines 4 forbidden actions which a ruler must execute a minister for doing no matter what. They are using wealth to seize personal authority, seizing command of the military, having a private court or private correspondence between generals, and lastly, embezzling state funds for selfish reasons. In these cases, Hanfei states that a ruler must execute ministers for engaging in these behaviors no matter how close they are to him, or whatever reason they may have had. The reason that Hanfei argues for this is obvious. These are actions that all undermine the ruler and allow individuals to seize authority within the state, supplanting their ruler and becoming the ones that enforce the laws, the ultimate source of power in government. To Hanfei, this is a great perversion of authority. A state must be unified under one monarch, and all authority must come from him. He says that the ministers of a king should be like the hands that serve the head of a body. They should be absolutely loyal and never fail in their duty. Just as a hand does not second-guess the decisions of the mind, ministers should never question their duty, and Hanfei rails quite harshly against government workers who question the moral decisions of their ruler. With this quite harsh description of absolute rulership, you may come to the conclusion that Hanfei is describing a system where the ruler does all of the governing and his bureaucrats are disempowered puppets to his authority. This is, however, not accurate at all, and ironically, Hanfei's absolute ruler is a ruler who actually does not do much governing. Hanfei writes, "The ministers bear the labor, while the ruler reaps the success. This is called the principle of a virtuous sovereign." Here, in Hanfei's ideal system, the actual governing of the state is left to ministers who are chosen for their skills. The ruler uses them to fulfill tasks and punishes them or rewards them based on their performance. When they are no longer useful, the ruler casts them aside and replaces them. This is in accordance with Hanfei's Taoist background, where the ruler becomes the perfect embodiment of wu wei, or inaction, and does less in order to create a harmonious system. In this way, the ruler really only has two roles to fulfill: managing power and enforcing the laws. Now, how does the ruler manage power and curb the power of his nobles or ministers while doing very little? Well, according to Hanfei, he does so in three ways. The first is that he limits their rights. Hanfei writes that nobles must never be allowed the following privileges. The first is to determine who sees the ruler. The second is to control the wealth in the country. The third is to make personal moral decisions. And the fourth is to appoint their followers in the court, isolating their ruler. The removal of these privileges ensures that authority always stays with the king, and that the king is always the center and source of all power within the country. The second method is by punishing ministers for overstepping. Hanfei uses the following example. In the past, King Zhao of Han was drunk and sleeping. The official in charge of headgear saw that the king was cold, so he added a robe over him. When the king woke up and felt warm, he asked those around him, "Who put on this robe?" Those around him replied, "The official in charge of headgear." The king then punished both the official in charge of headgear and the official responsible for robes. He punished the official in charge of robes because he had neglected his duties, and he punished the official responsible for headgear because he had overstepped his role. It was not that the king did not dislike being cold. It was rather because the harm of officials encroaching on each other's duties is worse than feeling cold. Therefore, a wise ruler manages his ministers in such a way that they cannot overstep their official duties and claim credit for achievements, nor can they make statements that do not correspond to reality. If one oversteps their official duties, they will be executed. If what is said does not correspond to the facts, it results in punishment. When officials strictly adhere to their assigned roles and speak truthfully according to their responsibilities, then ministers cannot form factions or support each other improperly. Lastly, the ruler verifies the statements of his ministers. If they exaggerate their successes and in reality have only done a small task, they are punished. Funnily enough, Hanfei also prescribes punishments for those that minimize their merits and successes, because this too deceives their ruler. Well, so much for humility, I guess. What I find interesting is that Hanfei argues that it is through the law that a ruler becomes omnipresent, and in some ways omniscient. In Hanfei's view, laws should be organized with the ruler at their center. As such, it is from the ruler's perspective that all moral and legal judgments are made within a state. This, coupled with the idea that it is the ruler's authority alone that should be allowed to reward or punish people according to the law, effectively makes him the center of moral and public life. The people cannot escape the ruler's authority because he effectively is everywhere, watching every decision through the power of the legal system. This literally becomes the case when people are organized into groups that share collective responsibility for punishments that must report on one another to survive, effectively making it so that no one can hide from the law, and in doing so, every single individual becomes the eyes and ears of the king. In this way, the laws become the governing force for the ruler, which make it so that he does not need to see crimes to punish them. In Hanfei's view, this effectively accomplishes the goal of the king doing as little as possible while still maintaining societal order. As stated previously, Hanfeizi is often rightfully juxtaposed with Confucianism, because they are both really arguing for opposite things. Yet, I find it important to note that there are some things that the two agree upon. The first is that the ruler should be the model for the type of governance that he wishes to encourage. A ruler should be frugal and respectful and abstain from excess. As the embodiment of order, he should not do things that add to the chaos of society or harm people in unnecessary ways. It is for this reason that Hanfei, funnily enough, criticizes corvée labor, which he argues is unnecessarily harmful to people, despite the fact that corvée labor on great state projects such as the Great Wall is often what is most associated with legalist philosophy. Hanfei also agrees that Confucius was a virtuous person, and even praises him multiple times throughout the work. as a sagely person who represented authority and good governance. This is really where the similarities end, however, as the Hanfeizi has entire chapters that argue against the Confucian philosophy. The largest gripe that Hanfei has with Confucianism is its encouragement of a so-called rule without laws. In the Confucian order, the monarch is not only the center of order, but also from which morality emanates in a society. A good monarch is able to create the situation where people are able to cultivate their good human nature and learn to self-regulate. Hanfei argues that while people like Confucius may have been moral, they are quite rare. It is impossible to build a society around what is effectively the moral 1%. At the same time, a Confucian order structures government around the family, and argues that when this is done, the relationship between a ruler and their subject will be harmonious without the need for laws that mete out punishment. To Hanfei, this is absurd, because laws are the means that a ruler governs, and in his view, people are self-serving, right? They need punishments. At the same time, Hanfei correctly points out that while families are not necessarily always orderly, even if they have a basis in nature, and as such, structuring power around such an ideal system simply does not work. Hanfei is also highly critical of the Confucian scholarly class, who in his mind sow dissent and do not contribute to society. He argues they are a school that is obsessed with the past, bringing up previous accomplishments of sage kings, but failing to provide advice for the present. His writings were among the ones that firmly cemented the antagonism of the legalist school against Confucianism, ultimately culminating in the burial of 460 Confucian scholars by Qin Shi Huang when he unified China. Now that we have discussed at length the basics of the Hanfeizi, I find it important as well to close this conversation by really talking about the historical legacy of legalism. Legalism is largely credited with unifying China under Qing. This was because Qing, having undergone legalist reforms, abolished the corruption that plagued its adversaries, and was able to create a strong and centralized state with a strong military and government that could utilize all of its resources to conquer the other warring states. Despite this, as a unified empire, Qing collapsed in just one generation, and it is often thought that the collapse of Qing was hastened by its rigid legalist doctrine. A primary fault of legalism is that it ultimately creates a large population of citizens that effectively cannot exist within the official legal framework of society due to its harsh interpretation and implementation of collective punishment. For instance, if you are a collection of 10 households, maybe anywhere from 20 to 50 people, and only one person commits a crime, you have two decisions. You can either be punished, which will most likely be execution or some other gruesome punishment such as being maimed or having your crime tattooed on your face, or you can rebel if you want to live. This system works when the state is strong and able to punish those who resist, but what happens when the government is weak or splintered and everyone starts resisting? It will immediately collapse. This is the exact situation which was illustrated during the collapse of Qing and the rise of Han. When the Qing dynasty was collapsing, Liu Bang, the founder of the Han dynasty, was in charge of managing a delivery of penal laborers. When they were on their way to their destination, a few of them escaped, and according to Qin laws, all prisoners and the people in charge of the delivery would be executed for this crime. Rather than die, Liu Bang had no choice but to free the remaining prisoners, and him and his crew became bandits. Ultimately, this decision put him on the path to be emperor when the Qin state collapsed, something that would have never been possible had the laws of Qing been less harsh. Ironically, Liu Bang and the early emperors of the Han dynasty continued to sponsor legalism before gradually adopting Confucian reforms under emperors Jing and Wen. These emperors, however, did not entirely abandon legalism, and really fused these two philosophies together into a syncretic one that encouraged moral and benevolent governance, while also maintaining harsh laws that protected the authority of the sovereign. It was this method of governance that really dictated Chinese governance and dynastic politics for the next 2,000 years. And it is this reason why when you watch a Chinese drama, for instance, or read a Chinese history book, the emperor will espouse kind and soft governance in one breath and execute an entire clan of more than 1,000 people in another. Today, legalism is important for understanding the cultural and historical context for government in East Asia, which are at times still known for their harsh laws and strict punishments. So, what do you think? Is Hanfei right? Are humans fundamentally selfish and need a powerful legal system to cow them into submission? Or was Hanfei wrong, and his view of humanity ultimately created a system of legal abuse that lasted over 2,000 years? Well, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.